I didn't specifically set out to write science fiction. I wrote the story that I wanted to write, and it just came through me with Moxyland that I was writing kind of a near future Cape Town, but very, very close to where we are currently. So I didn't have a strategy to do that, but I do think that using elements of the fantastic allow us to talk about the world in a different way. It gives us a fresh perspective on things. It's like seeing things through a distorting mirror. And Moxyland is obviously a future corporate apartheid system where we're controlled by our cell phones. It's set in Cape Town, and Zoo City is in kind of a criminal underworld, and it's a black magic noir where criminals have magical animals. And it was a way for me to be able to talk about what's happening right now with technology in Moxyland and how dependent we are on our cell phones, and the corporations and how they get involved with government, and how as an artist you have to compromise yourself. With Zoo City, it was a way of talking about refugees, and it was a way of talking about crime, which is a huge theme in South Africa, but also the monsters in our past that come up from the depths to eat us alive when we least expect them. I think the big difference is that publishers are more open to it, and the market is more open to it, and the success of District 9, which is a perfect example of using a distorting mirror, because it's, if it had just been about refugees, it would have been like 12 Years a Slave, a very heavy movie that people wouldn't really want to see. And if it had just been about aliens, it would have been Battlefield Earth. So the fact that he mixed both of those things together, which is not to say it's not problematic, especially in the Nigerian depiction, but it was a very interesting film because it did that mashup, and it took a social issue and kind of twisted it around. And I think that is what South African science fiction in particular does so very well. And we are seeing an explosion now. Publishers are more open to it. And there are new books coming out by Charlie Human, Apocalypse Now, which is just a fun urban fantasy set in Cape Town with, a lot of the kind of pop culture myths and mythology about the Tokoloshe, for example, which is, I guess, kind of like an incubus in South African folklore. He looked at the tabloid headlines and said, well, what if those tabloid headlines were real about these monsters under the bed and everything else? Sarah Lotz has a book called The Three. She writes with her daughter as Lily Hearn, and Deadlands is an amazing YA zombie apocalypse series. But all of these books, the other one which is very interesting and new is Alex Latimer's The Space Race, and Rachel Zadok's Sister. But what's interesting about all of these books in South Africa is that they all have a social conscience. There is an edge of being aware of what's happening around you and wanting to talk about it in your fiction. I don't think science fiction is about science. I think science fiction is about people, and it's about kind of twisted realities. So I don't know if it's going to specifically drive the technology. What I think is interesting of the link between science and technology and science fiction in Africa is how we use it. We use technology very differently to the rest of the world, especially cell phones, and especially in rural areas. I've been a journalist and I've covered amazing programs which work in rural areas where they don't have any landlines, they don't have hospitals, they don't even have clinics. But they are able to manage tuberculosis and other diseases through very basic old school cell phones and just a simple drop-down menu. And they'll train up someone in the community and get them to go around house to house and have a checklist and SMS that to a central computer at UCT. And be able to track, okay, well, you have these symptoms, the SMS has come back, you need to go to the doctor. And we innovate, and we have to innovate. And I think that makes us much more interesting to write about and a much more interesting place generally. I think Africa we're hungry for the world. We're hungry for life. I'm not talking about starving African children in the documentaries. But we have a passion and a curiosity and engagement, and I think a resilience and reconciliation, especially in South Africa. I think our ability to reconcile and our sense of humor, which is quite a dark sense of humor, but I think it has to be to deal with the stuff that we have in our daily lives. And I think that puts us in a very good position to go into the future, and the fact that we have to be scrappy entrepreneurs, and we have to figure stuff out, and we haven't been able to rely on the other world. We haven't been able to rely on the rest of the world. I think it gives us a huge potential and a huge promise. We just have to get our politics sorted out, and we just have to, look after the important things, which are education and policing and justice and childcare and women's rights. And I think we are moving in more liberal ways, especially in the cities. And if we can just continue doing that, that would be amazing. Yeah, I've just finished my new book. It's called Broken Monsters. It's set in Detroit, which again is very similar to Hillbrow and Zoo City. It looks like a ruined place from the outside. You know, they're boarded up buildings, there's a high crime rate, it's a symbol of everything that is wrong with this country. So, you know, in America they have Detroit, in South Africa we have Hillbrow. It's kind of about the birth and death of the American dream, but also dreams in general and the unconscious and the broken pieces of who we are inside and how we put ourselves back together. But it's kind of a series of strange, monstrous murders, but it's really about the people who come together around that and their kind of individual stories. And it's very much about Detroit and the people of Detroit, the same way Zoo City is about the people of Hillbrow, with this kind of element of the supernatural added on top. But for my next books, I'd like to come back to South Africa. I have some ideas, yeah. We'll see how commercial they are, but you know, I'm not going to be locked into writing a particular kind of book. You know, I want to write whatever I want to write. And I think, if I look at the artists that I admire, David Mitchell, Margaret Atwood, people like Stanley Kubrick. He never did the same thing twice. And I'd like to do the same. Just vary my vocabulary and vary my stories. And I think always my books are a kind of psychology for me. You know, normal people go to psychologists. I work out my issues through writing a book. I do want to write a sequel to Zoo City, and if I do that, then I'd like to maybe go to Lagos, maybe Accra, yeah. So you might have to hook me up with some contacts.